My name is Guy Alberghini. This is a broadcast of the United States Constitution. Each broadcast will cover a very small section of the Constitution, policies that go against that section of the Constitution, as well as possible solution or solutions. If you just go along with the bad policies, then you agree with them. And if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So in 20 days is the town election. For select board, just vote for Guy Alberghini. And with the early ballots, it's of course earlier than that. Today we have another special guest from the Larouche organization, Dennis Speed. Dennis, want to take it away?
Well, interesting. So you were just talking about an election for the position of selectman. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, in one sense, we can start the discussion there because the United States is now in the beginning stages of its what should be its celebration of the 250th anniversary of its birth. People talk about the Declaration of Independence, and they talk about the fact that the United States established in 1776 through a Declaration of Independence, and then established as a nation between 1776, 83 really, and 89, ultimately through a constitutional republic, is the oldest continuous constitutional republic in recorded history. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like to talk about how young the United States is, but actually the United States is the oldest successful continuous constitutional republican government in history. And what we find, at least have found, is that very few people are even aware that we are now at the beginning of the celebration of that 250th anniversary. 50 years ago, half a century ago, 1976 was a big deal. It's partially a big deal because people were pretty, shall we say, deeply negatively affected. One could use a slang term, bummed out by the ignominious end to the ignominious Vietnam War, which ended, the day that we're actually recording this, April 30th. It ended with the fall of Saigon. The North Vietnamese army broke through the gates of Saigon on April 30th of 1975. And as a consequence, in part, people wanted to forget about that ignominious episode in our country's history in which we ended up fighting a country whose leadership had on September 2nd, 1945, declared independence from the French by quoting from the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, wow.
That's the first thing that happened. Ho Chi Minh, that's the first thing Ho Chi Minh did. Some friends of ours, a man by the name of Mitch Warbell, I wouldn't exactly call him a friend, but he was sort of a friend, was one of the members of the OSS team that was sent in 1944 in to rescue Ho Chi Minh, who was in that time an ally of the United States to fight against the Japanese, and happened to spend an evening talking and drinking with him. And they were all talking about what was happened after the war. And so in the course of that, Ho Chi Minh began talking about how he wanted to establish this new republic, new government. And Mitch Warbell began to recite the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. And Ho Chi Minh finished reciting almost the entire Constitution. So it shows you something about the United States and what happened to the United States after 1945. But what's more important is the anniversary, which is now the 250th. At least we had that fight back in 1976. Today, we don't even have a memory. So rather than complain about that, because I don't think that's really necessarily the fault of the American people exactly. I don't think it's actually the fault of what people like to call the secret government, deep state. They have a lot of terms for it. I think it has to do with the fact that it's the fault of the people that think it's a big deal. In other words, if you're willing to complain about how bad things are and you haven't changed it, maybe you're the problem. And so in that spirit, what I believe needs to be done is to call attention to the fact that once upon a time, 250 years ago, the 3.5 million people in the colonies then, there wasn't the America, of course, they were only in the continent called the American continent, found themselves in a situation in which they decided in the aftermath of some significant military encounters with the mother country, England, to hold what were called Continental Congresses. They were held in Philadelphia. And these would be gatherings of people who would come together and talk, discuss from all of the 13 colonies. And over the course of about a year and a half period, they ultimately met in Congress in Philadelphia. And they had created a committee, 5-person committee, including Ben Franklin and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And 2 other individuals, one of them James Wilson, the other one escapes me at the moment, may have been Livingston, I'm not sure. And they begin the process of writing up a declaration, goes through several different drafts, and they present that to the Congress, and the Congress adopts it. And from that day, they are at odds with the mother country. They are committing treason against the mother country. They are guilty of treason and subject to hanging, those who signed the declaration, that is. And that process leads to where we are today. So I think that's the first thing I'd like to say. I think the issue is if you think that you are now living in the United States of amnesia instead of the United States of America, then you ought to do something to help people remember what this country was created for and who did it and why it happened and what needs to be done now.
Yes. When you were talking about Vietnam, it's like, I don't think I was taught anything about that you covered. And I know a lot of people that came back from Nam are treated horribly, and as far as what like them going over the Declaration of Independence, that's amazing. Never knew that before.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, the idea that people would not know, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one country to dissolve one people to dissolve the bonds which connect them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the equal and just station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God intend them, a just respect for the opinions of mankind renders that they should declare the causes of their separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. that whenever any government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundations upon such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to themselves shall seem appropriate for their security and happiness. Now, if you don't know that, the old radicals of the 1960s that opposed the Vietnam War knew what I just said. Many of us opposed the Vietnam War on the basis of the Declaration of Independence. See, it's an interesting country because the ideas, you talk about the treatment of the Vietnam veterans. The worst treatment of the Vietnam veterans was for them to have been sent, because that war was an unjust war. And you have a country which with that being said, people protested it because they knew they had the right to. So even the protests came out of recognizing the principles upon which the country was founded. And the changes in the country can come out of recognizing the principles upon which the country is founded. You don't have to overthrow the government of the United States to completely revolutionize the government of the United States. You know why? Because that's what the Declaration of Independence says in the first place. The document gives you not only the right, it also later says it is your duty to change these circumstances. That when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a desire to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. This is the Declaration of Independence. It's not calling for its own dissolution. It's saying this is the government that we are creating. Now, the Declaration of Independence is not the Constitution. That's true. But the point is, the only reason you get to have a constitutional government is because of this earlier document. And every American should know these things, first because they should be taught, of course. But even if they're not taught, you're supposed to know this because you're supposed to know something about who you are. Americans, I have a lot of things about I'm Black, I'm Italian, I'm gay, I'm trans, I'm this, I'm that. Well, wait a minute. What about the American part?
Yeah.
Where'd that go? What is that? Or what does it mean to be an American? And so, one of the things I think is important about the notion of celebrating this is that people get to know what it is. I don't think there's any problem with the fact that people have a lot of questions. They'll want to know what about the people that founded the country and who are they and what were their problems and were they good or were they bad? And that's all legitimate. I have no problem with any of it. But I think what people have to realize is that if they think they're having problems now, if they think there's something that has to be changed or improved in the country now, that all of the tools have been provided for them to do that. And then you have to ask us, and you have to look at the fact, okay, well, people did that 250 years ago. How'd they do that? So what I like always to challenge people with is to say, okay, you say you don't like these guys, so you have some problem with them of a particular type. So, all right. But here's the issue for me. If you're here talking about this and you're not only able to talk about it, but you're able to change what they did, what are you doing? I mean, maybe the biggest problem, a friend of mine was a minister who is now deceased, played a very important role in the civil rights movement. His name was James Bevel, Reverend James Bevel. He said to me in January of 1993, he said, what I think the problem is in America today, he said, that was now 32 years ago. He said, I think the problem is that people have never co-signed the Declaration of Independence. I said, all right, what are you saying? Because I knew this was going somewhere. And we were in Philadelphia at that moment, and we were about to have a meeting with another minister. His name was Alonzo Shepard, and he had one of the big churches in Philadelphia. And that went back, not quite to the American Revolution, but close, 1800s. So, and this might have been January 15th or 16th. It's probably King's birthday. And so he said, yeah, I think what the problem is that people have not really agreed to the propositions in the Declaration of Independence. He said, I don't know whether people actually think that they agree with the founders of the country. He said, I hear a lot of people talk about how they don't like these people. He said, but these people showed up, as he put it, with a pistol in one pocket and a bottle of whiskey in their back pocket. And they showed up for the purpose of putting together a country. And they got in a room together, and they didn't necessarily trust one another, but they thought about this, and this is what they came up with.
And they certainly didn't agree all the time, but they worked together to come up with something.
In fact, the country was largely based on not disagreement exactly, but the ability, the right, not just the right to do it, but the responsibility to say what you thought, stand up for what you thought, fight for what you thought, and that we would guarantee everybody's right to do that as a unity. And so it was a United States. They were all very different, right? You know, like South Carolina wanted to keep slavery. Connecticut didn't want slavery. Rhode Island didn't want slavery. Pennsylvania was kind of on the fence. A lot of good people in there who wanted to do something different. Virginia said, hey, guys, we got a problem. They had tried to abolish it under the British, and it had been told no. And there's a lot of slave owners there. So, okay, so this was something which was discussed and argued about at the convention. The people don't even talk about it. There was a clause that was written originally around slavery, against slavery, denouncing the king for slavery. And South Carolina objected to it, so it was taken out of the Declaration. But nobody's even told that there was this argument. And then at the time of the Constitutional Convention, people like Gouverneur Morris, that's his name. It looks like governor, but it's spelled with a U. So it's a Gouvenor. He lived in New York, but he was at the convention as part of the Pennsylvania delegation. There's particular reasons for that. He argued, he was Hamilton's best friend, and he argued vociferously against slavery. He and Hamilton had been involved in the forming of units of Black troops who fought in the American Revolution. And so they were arguing, hey, wait a minute, slavery actually holds a country back. You need to have free labor, which is skilled labor, and we have to go from plantation economy to what they call manufacturing or manufacturers. Hamilton became the first Secretary of Treasury, and he wrote a document called Report on Manufactures, along with 3 other documents: the report on the National Bank, report on public credit, and report on the constitutionality of a national bank. And their whole idea was, okay, here's how we're going to abolish slavery. We're going to replace it with industry. And we're going to replace it with skilled labor. So muscle power is not going to matter. It's going to be that we'll have machinery that develops, and we're going to increase, as they put it, the objects of enterprise. So they founded whole cities, like Jersey City was called the Jersey Company. And this was part of Hamilton's thing. Paterson, New Jersey, same thing. He and George Washington. They looked at the Patterson Falls over there, and they created the thing called the Society for Useful Manufactures. That's how these guys thought. And so the real revolution, the real idea of not just the battles, but then the consolidation of power and the actual progress that you then saw. This is who we really are. And I'll just plug a book by a friend of mine. He just wrote it. It's called Who We Are. Anton Chaikin. It's got 2 volumes of it out. This one's called America. It's called America's Fight for Universal Progress from Franklin to Kennedy. And this is the first volume. And he just published the second one. I don't know if he's going to get the third one out in time. I think it'll probably take him a couple of years to fully get it done. But just want to point out that and another one, which is by another friend of mine, Graham Lowry, How the Nation Was Won. Graham is deceased now, but this is a book he wrote called America's Untold Story, Volume 1, 1630 to 1754. So this is actually even before 1763, when the battles began with the British around the Stamp Act and things like that. So, a lot more could be said, but I think I'll stop there. And I'm just inviting everybody to get involved in every town. And I mentioned the selectman election because the idea of people standing for office and standing up in the smallest units, ward committees, county committees, selectmen, right? And then you get into your city councils, that level of involvement, that was the basis of the way that the United States was supposed to function, on the town committee level, on the town meeting level. And we have to get our people thinking that way again, because if they begin to practice that again, they will find their way back to the original spirit of the people that started this experiment in the first place.
So one thing I'm trying to wrap my mind around is saying that Len said, remember the future. So the way I'm thinking of it is going from the future back to the beginning of the Revolutionary War and remembering the future, which is now and really our future.
Mm-hmm.
Am I close on that?
Yeah, well, I think the idea is this. Think about once upon a time, we went to the moon. And even if people don't think that we went to the moon, I know why they might not. You do know that everybody does know there is some kind of a space program of some type because there's satellites. So what if it were the case that we pooled the resources of the people in the world, not just to go to the moon or something, go to Mars, but to think about this idea of what space is? And you had a situation in which kids were using telescopes instead of AR-15s or AK-47s, for that matter, or drugs, just astronomy clubs, in which the idea was to really just think about this idea. If you have a Hubble Space Telescope and you're seeing now into the origins of space and time, they say to us, let's assume for a minute that that's possible. So that's the future. And you're looking into, in one sense, the distant past. So it's the future looking into the past. That's what we're able to do. So remembering the future means, to me, that what we look at is, we used to say every generation should be living at a higher standard of living and know more and be capable of more, not just materially, but even intellectually, emotionally, than the generation before. And now we've abandoned that because we don't remember how to do that. And I would suggest maybe we ought to review what we did in the first place, because we might then remember how to make our future, because that's the way that you remember the future. You got to go back to how you made it in the first place.
Yes. And a lot of that information is gone because, people pass away that had the information and it wasn't passed on in books or teaching someone. And
yeah, but on the other hand, it's like a lot of our oral history. You can always find somebody that really knows it. You can't ignore them, though. That's the problem. See, somebody's telling you, but you're not listening because they're not on your television, or somebody doesn't like them for some other reason, or maybe they weren't so good at their own finances and they're kind of sitting over in some part of town, and you know they don't do too good.
Because because we have a few minutes left, do you want to mention the conference at the end of next month or
Well,
something about it?
I'll just say this: if people are interested, you mentioned it. It's a Larouche conference. Sure, it is. It's sponsored by the Schiller Institute. It's going to be on May 24th and 25th. It's right down in New York City area, and a lot of panels, 3 panels, and we'll be discussing matters just like this. There starts early in the morning on Saturday. And I guess people can contact you to find out more information, or myself, Diane Sayre, who is kind of the president, the head of the Larouche organization these days. And everybody's welcome. Maybe that's enough to say about it. It's called,
Okay.
A vision, a beautiful vision for humanity in a time of great turbulence.
Yes. So a couple taglines I tell the viewers is, if you just go along with the bad policies, then you agree with them. And if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Dennis, great to have you on here. Okay, see you at the end of next month.
Great. Excellent.
Thank you very much for watching this broadcast. As it says at the beginning of the preamble, we the people. That's you, that's myself. Are you part of the solution or part of the problem? One way to tell is if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. So call, email, meet with your reps and senators, local leaders, tell them what they should be doing. They govern with the consent of the governed, and if you don't tell them what to do, it's implied that you agree with them and they're doing what you want them to do. So thank you very much again, and look forward to seeing you during the next broadcast.